Welcome, everybody, to a Sale Weekly Recap video. We're going to kick things off today with Tim, who just published over at Understanding AI. Tim, tell us about your piece.
Sure. So I've been trying to think about how to keep up with all the models that come out. Google released Gemini 3 a few weeks ago, and then Anthropic a week later released Claude 4.5. And it's hard because these models do so many different things now. And the different companies are kind of optimizing for different things. So you can kind of pick a few tasks and say who does better at this, but it's like not clear if those are the ones my readers care about, or just in general, is my little bespoke benchmark actually saying anything useful. So I thought it'd be interesting to take a step back and look at more at kind of the culture of the companies, because I think that does have an impact on the way these models behave. So I think, and Google, I was an intern at Google 15 years ago, so I know something about the culture. And Google is really a very engineering-oriented company where they try to hire the smartest engineers they can, give them a lot of autonomy to solve hard technical problems. And what I think you see at Google is they are really focused a lot on the kind of low-level infrastructure. They have this chip called the TPU that they developed in-house, which gives us independence from NVIDIA. They're very, very good at building data centers and having high performance computing systems. And so they've been very good at wiring these TPUs all together into these big clusters to allow them to train very efficiently and do inference efficiently. TPUs are good enough now that they got a big deal with Anthropic to supply up to 1 million TPUs to Anthropic. And so Opus was also traded on Google. And I think what you see is that and then, so one thing I think you see that with Gemini 3 is Gemini 3 did very well on I think it's called the Simple QA benchmark, which is a test of factual knowledge. They do this benchmark without access to internet search. So it's like, what is the model memorized? And Gemini 3 absolutely crushed the other models, which I think is an indication that it's a very big model. We don't know exactly how big these models are, but I think it's a reasonable guess that Gemini 3 might be a larger model in terms of number of parameters than OpenAI or Anthropic's models. So I think that's a sign that Google is really this engineering-focused company that's focused on squeezing maximum performance in the sense of number of tokens per unit of compute or dollar spent. And what they don't seem to be as focused on is kind of the high-level characteristics of the model. I mean, certainly they're trying to, get its good performance out of the benchmarks, but I compared that to Anthropic, which was founded by a group of people at OpenAI who felt that OpenAI wasn't as safety conscious as they should be, and has really focused on big picture, like what kind of model do we want? They hired a philosopher named Amanda Askell, whose job it is to think about kind of the ethics of models. And one of the early innovations was this thing called constitutional AI, where they'll write a human-readable document describing the characteristics they want of their model. And then they'll do reinforcement learning. Well, they'll have the model produce an output, and they'll ask another LLM, does this output, is it consistent with our constitution? And if it is, it'll reinforce it. If it's not, it'll give negative reinforcement. And this kind of deep thinking about models, I think, gives the Anthropic models this very distinctive flavor, where people talk about what great writers they are, what a nice personality they are. And an interesting thing is they have this kind of diligence, like they're among the best models for agentic tasks. And it's not clear if that's, it could just be a coincidence. It could be that because Anthropic was an early kind of focus on reinforcement learning, they got good at reinforcement learning, which is then helpful for this training. But it's also possible, I mean, you think about people with a good work ethic, like that's kind of a person with a good character. Maybe it's the case that if you actually train models to kind of be good people, one of the outcomes is that they tend to have a good work ethic and be even keeled and so forth. There was a funny tweet somebody posted a few months ago of a Gemini model being kind of depressed and be like, oh, I give up. This task is too hard. I have a terrible model. I have to delete everything I just did. And so it's possible, actually, if you focus on this high level, human readable aspects of what personality the model has, maybe that actually makes it better at certain tasks. Anyway, it's different. It's interesting. I think it's these two companies have very different, I think, ways of thinking about what characteristics of models they want, and it leads to models that have very different flavors to them.
We have here on the call today, not one, but two people who are extremely knowledgeable in the field of benchmarking. So I'm going to turn things over to Florian, who can talk a little bit about his journey in trying to understand models from a number on a graph perspective, and then also through your own intuition. Florian, by the way, is joining us for the first time. He's from Interconnects. He focuses both on data and also on model vibes over at Interconnects. And Florian, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, hey, super glad to be here. I work at Interconnects for Nathan, and I cover mostly open models and the general data side over at Interconnects. And yeah, to come back to your question, there really is sometimes in those model releases a disconnect between what the numbers tell you and what the benchmarks tell you or try to tell you and what the real performance is. For those closed model releases, this mostly tracks, so a model which performs well on benchmarks will perform well on other tasks, as those models are trained on a variety of data, on a lot of different tasks, and a lot of different tasks which are not yet expressed in benchmarks. But especially in the open model space, there are also some models which are narrower in their expertise, so they are good in benchmarks and good if you use them a very specific way. And if you have a very specific task, they really shine in this area. But if you try to apply them to other problems, especially try to use them like those closed models, your performance or the quality of these models will drop by huge amount of aspects.
Yeah, so regarding the benchmark discussion, to be honest with you personally, well, I don't really believe the public benchmarks that much. I mean, in a sense, what Florian said, I do believe that usually better scores correlate with better real world experiences, performances, but it's like, yeah, with a grain of salt. There was like a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, no, even longer, there was like a paper by someone looking at CIFAR-10, which is like a computer vision data set that is very popular for developing convolutional neural networks back then. Now, I mean, I think it's too trivial to use, but it's basically like MNIST, CIFAR-10, ImageNet, and so forth. And they looked at, I don't know, like 20 models, the test set performance they report in the paper, and then they created a new CIFAR-10 data set. I think they went into great lengths of like making sure the distribution of the new data has the same distribution as the original data set. And they also collected it the same way, like going to Google, finding these images and matching the distributions of classes and everything. So yeah, making really sure the new test set is really representative. And they found that the reported accuracy does not reflect the real accuracy. It was like a significant number of percentage points lower the real accuracy on new data. On the other hand, what was nice though, there was still the same trend. Like, so even though the numbers were, of course, like inflated because people, if the data, so there's a common saying, if the data set is available on the internet, it's not a test set because, people train, and they don't even necessarily train on it, but even if you multiple times just test on it, it becomes biased. And, but the nice thing is they were still able to reproduce the same ranking. So even though the full numbers don't really reflect the real world performance because of overfitting or, I wouldn't say cheating, but like overusing the data set, you could still see on new data the same trend holds true, that model 1 is better than model 2 and so forth. So the ranking is preserved, which is nice. So in that sense, I do think the benchmarks are useful. But personally, I also think these benchmarks are more like a minimum threshold someone has to cross to get attention, basically, where it's like, okay, you have to have at least this benchmark performance, because if you don't, then your model is crap, basically, because that's what we expect your model to perform at least. But then I think, what's missing is beyond that. Because it only captures certain qualities of the model, but I don't think there is any reliable way that people can compute or tell you based on certain numbers which LLM is better, because there are many different tasks, different qualities, and it's hard to combine that into one number. Now that I'm talking about it, I also remember a paper a few years ago where they tried something like that for, I think it was, again, computer vision perhaps, but having different data sets, having different benchmark performances. And what they did is they tried to combine them into one single score. Like I think they did a PCA to find the most, informative directions, and then combined that into, so they did a principal component analysis of the whole benchmarks and scores and looked at then the principal components and stuff like that, compressing it onto like 1 or 2 dimensions so that they could visualize it in a heat map, for example, in 2D. Long time ago. But I think something like that is still like a hack, I would say, and there's no reliable way of doing that, I think, for LLMs. And what I also wanted to say, not too long ago, when Llama 4 came out, it performed really well on the benchmarks, but then actually when people started using it, well, it didn't perform so well anymore. So in that sense, always take the benchmarks with a grain of salt until people actually get their hands on the models and, see how they perform on their tasks they care about. But then again, how do you capture this information? Like, it's more like at that point, like a gut feeling, almost like, okay, I feel like this model is more useful to me, but how do you kind of like aggregate that across all the users? I mean, there are ways like the leaderboards, but again, there was a paper on that, how easily it can be, gamed, especially also models that get more exposure, also get more data and stuff like that, where it's like, it's not really a fair game because not everyone uses all models equally. So it's all kind of like biased. And yeah, I think it's almost like a billion dollar question to find a reliable way to evaluate LLMs, because also if you solve that problem, then you can also develop better LLMs, I guess, because you can use that as something to develop the LLM. But then again, it's like a chicken egg problem, or like what is it called? Like a circular problem where it's almost like a rat's race, right? You want to make better benchmarks, helps you train the model, but then the benchmarks become obsolete and you need better ones. And yeah, so tricky.
Someone who works at a frontier lab once expressed it to me as the difference between someone's ELO rating in chess, as in like how many games they win and lose in chess, versus somebody who you would want to spend an entire afternoon playing games with. Like, those are related phenomenon, but they're nowhere near the same thing in terms of the vibe of it.
Yeah. I think that is pretty much like a good analogy. I think also there are, again, like if we look at chess, again, it's only one discipline, and now with LLMs you have to kind of like add 10 dimensions to it, because it's not only let's say chess, it's coding, it's writing, it's summarizing, it's images, it's lots of things going on, basic math.
All right, well, let's switch gears for a moment and talk a little bit about the experience of Florian, Irene at NeurIPS this year. You guys were both there. I believe it was your first time, Florian, but Irene, you were there with me, I want to say last year in Vancouver. So why don't you guys tell us some of your highlights from NeurIPS 2025?
So for context, I cover mostly Chinese AI labs, and the mood there is a little more upbeat than last year, because last year Canada didn't give any visas out to any of the Queen people, I think, and a lot of other Chinese researchers. So last year there was a lot of talk about the Chinese labs not being able to present their research, and Chinese researchers feeling quite excluded from the whole thing. And this year, because of the co-location in Mexico City a bit, and also with what's been happening with DeepSeek and all the other open models, people have been feeling quite a bit more upbeat and a little more willing to talk to us reporters. We've had some really good conversations with people, I think Chinese and English, about what they've been working on and what they're looking forward to. So that was really lovely. I've also had some good conversations with people about applications they have for healthcare, for science, that the more kind of engineering things that people are excited about. So that felt quite interesting.
I heard you got to sit down with some of the Chinese frontier labs.
Yes, yeah. So we were able to talk to MiniMax. I think this is the main one. They have some multi-modal models and called Hailuo and a chatbot, obviously, and they sort of see themselves as one of the more kind of quote unquote AGI inclined labs in China because of their origins in more kind of human computer interaction and companion need products, and a whole kind of roadmap now leading into coding being one of their main verticals and enterprise integration. So they were really excited to share a lot about exactly how they use AI inside their organization to drive their own productivity, even in things like legal and finance and lots of other things that are not the technology itself. I think even though that's just kind of one conversation, one lab, I think it's again like one indicator of what's kind of happening across the whole landscape of Chinese labs being more willing to join the international conversation and really excited to show off what they're doing. And this links us back to the conversation around why exactly they're so enthusiastic about open source. And the underlying logic that a lot of people argue, which I agree with, is that if they didn't open source, then because of their obvious like geopolitical considerations, most Western users would not use them, and companies will not be eager to adopt what they're working on because they are Chinese. Being open source and being kind of trying to be as transparent as they possibly can be allows them to win influence and also get feedback from developers and join the community in a way that is advantageous to them in the longer term. So yeah, that was really, really interesting. And we over at ChinaTalk we're looking forward to hopefully interviewing more of them maybe next year.
Absolutely. So Florian, you also got a moment to speak to some of the other labs inside of the US open source world. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Arcee's release? Arcee? Oh, help me, Florian. Help me, I'm drowning.
Yeah, it's Arcee. I still don't
Arcee.
believe that they want to be called that way or spelled that way, but yeah, it's pretty weird. No, in terms of the US open releases, I think all of them waited to, or at least all Western labs, all waited for NeurIPS to unleash their models. So it was pretty much that every day one of the Western labs released something. Mistral released, Arcee released, the startup from Basvani, I think they're called Essential. They released a model. So it was just model after model after model that was released. And you could really feel that, or at least, no, I think that's a general feeling that the Western labs and Western models and VCs are coming to the realization that Chinese model makers are in the open space ahead by a good amount. And if they aren't taking action now by funding those startups, by allocating resources to those important players, that the US open models and Western open models will fall further behind. So that was quite impressive time of releases. I would say that the current model releases are still like 6 or 9 months behind the Chinese model releases. If you compare one of the new models to the recent releases from Qwen, you would always choose Qwen, especially they are especially a lot better in multilingual prompts, whereas the American ones, at least right now, really focus on English. So that's something for me I've observed. And yeah, I've also talked to some of the Chinese researchers, both at labs and at universities. I was surprised how many people from China were there. Got asked more than once for my WeChat account. Had to back away as I don't have WeChat, at least not yet. So it was really fun, and it was interesting to see what they are working on, that they are also all trying to push out the next models, trying to scale harder to release even better models in the very near future, as Chinese New Year is slowly but surely coming up.
Florian and Irene, you mentioned the release of new models during or at NeurIPS. And I remember, on Monday, well, I think it was the Monday, one day before Mistral, DeepSeek version 3.2 model dropped. And I wanted to ask you, just in general, how big of a topic was that particular model? Because, DeepSeek hasn't released anything in a long... I mean, they have released a lot of things, but not like a major model, only more like stepwise improvements. I think it was maybe largely because they were, I don't know if in quotation marks forced is the right word, but they had to use the Huawei chips and then they went back to NVIDIA, and maybe that's why it took them almost a year. And then on the other hand, maybe a year is actually quite reasonable, to be honest with you. I think people got impatient, but honestly, I feel like 1 year for a major, that is, I feel like that should be reasonable. Anyway, so how big of a topic was that particular model? Because DeepSeek is such a big name now. Was that like a thing people talked about? Because I'm curious if releasing something during NeurIPS is a good thing or maybe a bad thing, because it could also be drowned out by other things.
So for ChinaTalk, we were doing also a lot of interviews just with people around the conference, asking them what they're excited about and what their sense is around the industry and what's been going on. And I have to be honest, the DeepSeek model did not come up very much. It is possible that part of it is just because people were really busy and they were not following the news quite as much. And I have to confess, even I haven't tried a new model yet. But I heard a lot more kind of excitement for Gemini, even there was some chatter about Amazon as well. And people talking that when people bring up DeepSeek in those interviews and in terms of their thoughts about the open source landscape, it's mostly to do with R1 and kind of what that did in terms of building out a business model. There was not a lot of chatter about the new one.
Interesting.
But people just haven't tried
Maybe they're waiting for R2. But also, I think there were multiple things also. I mean, I checked it out in detail and went through the paper and everything, but it was a weird time because, first it was NeurIPS, but then also Thanksgiving just the weekend before, where it's like, I think they did the same thing last year where they released V3 during Christmas, I think December 26th. Maybe people were just not on their computers, so they were like, well, we'll check that out later, forgot about it. Because I think, until R1, even V3 was not popular, really. I mean, no one really talked about it. They talked about retrospectively after R1 came out, but I think all the talk that happened with R1 was first, of course, because it performed well, but then they went back to V3, and I think the fact that they trained V3 so cheaply, that was even bigger news. But that came out already in December, and it wasn't a topic until January. So I think I was thinking the same thing. Is this actually a good idea to release something during the US holidays? I mean, it's also the Chinese holidays, I think, in January. I'm not sure. But then again, if you go back a few more weeks, then you have, I think, 2 or 3 weeks now, you have Gemini 3. And it's always like, yeah, well, if you have something ready, you better release it now because you don't know what's, coming out next week. I think today, for example, rumors have it GPT 5.2, right? So it's like you can't really wait. You have to release it or strike the iron while it's hot, I guess. One more thing about, you said the adoption of Chinese models is helped by the fact that they are open source. I was always wondering how many people do actually deploy something like DeepSeek. I mean, it is open source, but it is not super trivial, I would say, to run and optimize the model because they have their own, I mean, they have multi-head latent attention, and then they have now the sparse attention, where it is a bit more tricky to get your infrastructure ready to do that efficiently. And the other thing is I like the models a lot because they are transparent. I can check them out. I can see the code, the papers. I love them in that sense. But I also have a suspicion that you mentioned that the Western labs are, I think, 8-9 months behind, Florian, you said. But then I think at the same time, so if you look at Gemini and ChatGPT, I do think, well, they are currently with Claude up there, like the 3 top models. But I'm always wondering what would happen, or how much of it is due to the model itself and how much is due to their platform. Like, I wish we would know what happens if you take something like DeepSeek and you put it into the ChatGPT, let's say, platform. How well would that model perform? Because I suspect a lot of the good performance in ChatGPT comes from the fact that they do something with your prompt. Maybe they even have maybe something, I mean, I'm just speculating, but something like a script that just fixes the typos. So the LLM doesn't have to deal with the typos. It gets already the fixed text and little tricks and things like that, like context engineering, where they really clean everything up, make it nice formatting so that the LLM has to do less work. And so I always wonder, how good are like DeepSeek models really if you put them into a ChatGPT like interface? Because I do think, I don't know, people compare, it's almost like apples and oranges. They compare the baseline performance of the model, a pure model, with a platform, basically. It'd be interesting if someone would deploy DeepSeek really in the US, I think.
Yeah, just one little point. I thought Sebastian's ask was really interesting, and I have no way of quantifying exactly how popular it is to run an open Chinese model on your own computer. It's obviously like much more of a techie thing. Your average person is not doing that. I do know, however, that there is a real fandom for Qwen on Reddit. There are a lot of people on the internet who are really enthusiastic about running that locally. There are such Local Llama is a very fascinating subreddit. And yeah, I genuinely think that the availability and quality of Chinese open models this year has really driven that hobby up.
I mean, with Qwen 3, I'm personally also using it a lot. I use it on like inference sometimes for certain tasks, but also, let's say in my latest book, I'm coding it from scratch and also to run it locally because it's a great model and they have all the different sizes. But I think still with Qwen, it is like a level below maybe because it is smaller. I mean, there's still the 235 billion model. It's great for local inference on your computer. I was thinking even more beyond that, having DeepSeek deployed as a paid service, like ChatGPT, where people go there and they take care of it for you, make a really nice interface, do all the tips and tricks, engineering hacks that Google and ChatGPT is doing, and then, you pay for it. I think the DeepSeek team itself is doing that, but I don't know exactly, I mean, I have not used it. I don't know exactly how, let's say, sophisticated their platform is because it's just newer than ChatGPT. And I don't know if it's even legal or allowed in the US. I have not used it.
Yeah, so there are multiple different things. I think if you compare the DeepSeek website to ChatGPT, of course, ChatGPT has way more options and way more things. But I would not use DeepSeek as an example, but rather Kimi or MiniMax or Manus, all those platforms which try to get into the consumer space. And I would compare it mostly to Claude because Claude also is a website that no one uses. Claude is just used as a coding model, either in Cursor or in Claude Code. So that's probably the better comparison. And the Chinese labs, especially the new Chinese labs, are playing basically all the same playbook, which we've covered in Interconnects, is that they start with a brand account on all the Western social medias, especially on Twitter. And then with a new model release, they promote this brand account so it gets more followers, especially if the benchmark scores are good. And then they have to get some users. So to do this, they start with free trials, both on the API for some time, but they also all now offer coding plans, which slot right into Claude Code. And their performance is pretty good. Not on the level, but if you get it for free, means that's what you use, especially if you are a student. And after some time, the coding trial, of course, runs out. And then they offer a paid service, which is considerably lower than the $20 up to $200 from Claude. So the users can use coding plans for as little as $2, which a Zipu, or in America they call themselves just Z.ai, use. And they got, I think, 100,000, 600,000, a lot of users in there, both on their chat website and in their paid API, which was way more than I expected, just based on one model release, which was GLM 4.5. So you can really get, especially price-conscious users, to switch to your plan if the performance is not needed. And the last thing before I hand back over to Irene is that businesses are using those open models to fine-tune and base their own products on. So both Cursor and Windsurf said that they used some open model to train their composer, and I think the Windsurf model is called SWE1 or so. So they didn't tell anyone what their models are based on, but given the space of open models and of open space models, of open base models, it's highly likely that the base models are based on Chinese base models.
Irene.
Totally agree with Florian on everything. I just want to bring up quickly that if the question is chatbots as consumer products and as a kind of the user experience of it all, we should not be looking at the models made by these like small Chinese labs that are kind of AGI oriented, however you want to call it. You should be looking at Doubao. Doubao is the model made by ByteDance, and it doesn't score as highly on the benchmarks and everything, and you can't use it in the US. You can only use it with a Chinese phone number, but it is extremely customized to Chinese preferences in terms of user experience. It understands a lot of different dialects. It has voice mode. Has all these more entertainment-y features. It is very multimodal and people love it. It is currently the most popular chatbot in China.
So give us a sense of scope of how many people they have actively using this, and kind of a little bit about the background of ByteDance doing this themselves.
I have no numbers on exactly how many people are using it, but there are third-party Chinese market research firms that figured out that it is probably the most popular one. It has just kind of really capture the market when it comes to regular people using AI chatbots for various tasks, for just talking to it, for help me make a PowerPoint, for, like edit this article for me, or like help me find this information. And the thing about it is that ByteDance is also really able to... ByteDance can take advantage of the fact that it has TikTok, right, or Douyin in China, and the marketing for it is just comes so natively. It is... In terms of more like marketing branding side, Doubao in Chinese means like red bean bun. It's a very kind of friendly positioning that I think people forget that models like Kimi, like DeepSeek, don't have Chinese names. So for a lot of regular people who don't know English, it's actually like kind of frustrating to try to remember their names in English, which tells you a lot about the kinds of users that these smaller frontier labs imagine themselves as having. Whereas like Doubao is what refrain for is like AI for normies. It is it is popular in a way that is so much more down to earth. Its Chinese name is really funny. It's Yue Zhi An Mian, which is like kind of convoluted. It means the dark side of the moon. It's like Pink Floyd reference. Tells you all you need to know about what kinds of people they think of as their target audience.
But the other model, the one by Baidu, you mentioned Doubao, is that correct?
It's
It
ByteDance,
reminds
sorry, not Baidu.
Yeah, ByteDance. Sorry, ByteDance. I just remembered something with a B. But what is interesting about it is almost reminds me of Llama, like in the US back then. I think the name Llama also really helped making it more popular and accessible. And I mean, even people who are not, let's say, tech people have heard of Llama somehow. I don't know why, but it's like interesting where the name it makes it more like, I guess, approachable, like the whimsiness of it, and all the logos that have so many. I mean, called Olama, which was kind of inspired by Llama back then, but now it has nothing to do with Llama anymore. I mean, you can maybe run off the old Llama models there, but it's just like the name makes it so, I guess, approachable, which is kind of an important thing, I guess. Yeah.
Irene, you had a big ChinaTalk year in review of China and AI published today. It'll be coming out on sale tomorrow. And Florian, I heard you made a Chinese model tier list.
Yeah, so it was partly an exercise just in kind of looking back at what's been happening in Chinese AI this year and trying to look in retrospect and analyze what things actually mattered and what did not. And some things were really interesting, like some things were just obvious. For example, DeepSeek obviously still mattered. 12 months from its release, the Midas was kind of built this interesting business model for the Chinifying itself that remains, I think, relevant for a lot of the discourses happening in the industry. And some things just ended up not mattering very much. For example, people, I think, in the policy space were really excited about the labeling and watermark requirements that came into force in September because China was the first big jurisdiction to actually try to do something about AI-generated content online. And unfortunately, the enforcement has just not been very elaborate. We don't know what's going to happen with the efforts to try to regulate that. But yeah, please go check it out. Thank you so much.
You mentioned I think watermarking. Is it specifically for images or also for text? I totally missed this. I didn't know there was a requirement now. So is it like the Google Gemini models that have like a watermark in the right lower corner, something like that, or something else?
So I went back and read the original text of the regulation. If I understand it fully correctly, I'm not a lawyer, but if I understand it fully correctly, it's supposed to be every kind of synthetically made content. It did not specify just image or video or text or audio. And so if you really take the word to the letter of the regulation seriously, then it is not being enforced at all, because every day I go on the Chinese internet and see AI generated text, and even for the more kind of what you might call more egregious stuff of AI generated video, that's genuine deceptive. It's very easy for me to go on Xiaohongshu or WeChat right now and see stuff that's not labeled. So
Yeah, I can imagine even like images and videos, they are often used for almost like fun things, like, I don't know, this is not like important things, except when it comes to like these fake political videos. Then for text, like you said, almost everyone, like companies use text for marketing, for the news and everything. And imagine I don't know, have to start something like ChatGPT said, and then you have the news, and no one would read that anymore. It would be, I think, really bad for these businesses. So I can understand maybe why they don't, let's say, declare that yet. But on the other hand, also what will be interesting is for people who use these like AIs to write text, and they don't, let's say, they help their own writing by using AI to improve it a bit. There are people who don't do that. How do you enforce it? And you go around like and accusing people, hey, you used AI and now you have to pay a fine, and the person's like, no, I didn't use AI, I wrote it myself, but yeah, it sounds too good, it's AI. It will be really tricky. I think with images, videos, I can see that being a bit easier because it's either in AI generated or not, because it's really, I think right now it's not really possible or hard to make a hybrid where you have your own video and then use AI maybe to polish it up, maybe something like that. But for text, I think that's really tricky because you can, I don't know, you can't sometimes tell whether it's AI generated or not, and then it's kind of like everyone will be afraid of writing something,
Florian, tell us a little bit about your tier list upcoming on Interconnects.
We are doing a recap of all the open model releases and trying to select even just a subset of the model releases that are relevant or were relevant that day was really challenging. And we made China model lab tier list, I think in June, something around the summertime. And that got way more attention than we originally thought. with a lot of strong opinions on these placements. So we thought, all right, what if we do this, re-rank some of the Chinese labs and also add a lot of Western or the general open model labs on top of it. And it becomes really messy and really hard to rank some of these model labs in any direction to each other or any ranking to each other. So that will be super interesting to see the people react and probably take out their torches and pitchforks and hound us because their favorite lab is placed lower than they wanted it to.
Well, I can't wait to see the Twitter brawl that you're about to cause, Florian. Godspeed, sir.
Do you have maybe to defend yourself like an objective metric you are going to use, or is it too complicated to measure, basically similar to these benchmarks we talked about where, yeah, you can't, if you take the sum of all, it's kind of really hard. Do you use any, like, is it more like a gut feeling or is it more like a...
It's basically us, all byte based. If you were to use any metric, so we've been tracking all of Hugging Face, every step and every upload, every download that's been done on the site for months now. So we can recreate the site pretty well. But if you were to use the download metrics, for example, you would just have Quen at the very top because they cover every model size, every modality, and everything you ever wished for. And then it would be like basically nothing. And then some other smaller models. So trying to use any metric, the same applies to OpenRouter. If you try to get any numbers on anything, most of them are either gamed or heavily skewed. So it's hard. My favorite example that will probably be on your Twitter feed as well will be that we place ByteDance rather low because their papers are amazing. There's nothing against their papers, and that's what people always remember. But the models they actually release are mostly research artifacts. They released one open LLM, ByteDance Seed OSS, which was a 36B model, which is a good model. It's not amazing, it's not earth-shattering, it's a good model. But we placed it rather low based on that, and their other releases are just some niche research artifacts for the papers they are releasing. So people will be furious that this isn't on the level as Kimi or MiniMax or Z.ai. So this will be fun.
Yeah, I mean, I can just, people will probably have their favorite and then, but also I think there are so many different things that are hard to credit in a sense because it doesn't, like you said, also with ByteDance, it doesn't, perform that well, but still it's like a really good effort. For example, just top of my head, I haven't honestly used it really that much at all, basically, but I read about I think it's a Swiss model. It's called Arpertus or something like that. And what they did is they trained only on, I think, public, not even publicly available, but non-copyrighted data or something like that, which is, I think, like basically running a marathon, hopping on one leg or something, where it's like you make it more challenging to develop an LLM, but you want to do it the right way in a sense, which is a really good effort. And in that sense, so they did it, but the model is not very good. But I think it's still, I don't know, I didn't get any credit really on social media or something. I haven't seen any person talking about it, but it is, I think, a cool thing that people work on things like that. But how do you reward that? Like, doesn't really, it's, But then, on the other hand, like Irene said, the open source models in China, they do specifically try to be popular by doing the right things, by appealing to the audiences. And that's how the game is played, I guess, right? So it's interesting problem. I mean, not interesting problem, but like interesting way to think about. And at the end of the day, also like you mentioned, Quen 3 would be at the top, but maybe it should be at the top because it's boring, maybe, but it is what people use. So lots of interesting aspects about these leaderboards, and so I'm curious to see what you come up with and what surprises you will have in there.
Thank you very, very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. We'll link everyone's socials, and we'll be sending this out tomorrow in the afternoon, so look for it on your sale feed. Thank you very much, Irene and Florian, for your first time. We do this every single week. You're very welcome back to spend some time with us and discuss the pieces that are coming out on ChinaTalk and Interconnects. And Sebastian, thank you again for your time. We didn't even get to the bulk of your piece, so we're going to have to cover some of your work exploring DeepSeek next week on the pod. And otherwise, I'll talk to y'all next week. Hello and welcome to the evening version of the Sale Weekly Recap. I'm here with Nathan Lambert and Jasmine Sun of Interconnects and Jasmi.news, respectively. How are you both doing today?
I'm doing great.
Excellent. So, Jasmine, you had a piece this week after having a wild time at NeurIPS. So walk us through it.
Yeah, I have a piece. It's called How to Party Like an AI Researcher. And it was my version of a NeurIPS scene report. I will say that this was the first time I've ever been in NeurIPS, and I'm also not a grad student, which is sort of, the primary audience base. Very clear about how that skews my perspective, though I did try to talk to lots of grad students who had been to many prior NeurIPSs about their experience. The most interesting thing to me, to be honest, was that in a way, NeurIPS felt downstream of San Francisco. I expected that, I was reading a bit into NeurIPS history, and it does sort of feel like once upon a time in 1987, when the conference was first established, it was this kind of like renegade, like pirate crew of like weirdo neuroscientists and physicists doing something super different in their corner in Colorado. But now the thing that NeurIPS does, neural networks, AI stuff, it's not just the mainstream, but it's the thing that is upholding the entire tech industry, the entire economy. And so I think NeurIPS, with 25,000 people being sort of the center of computer science world, but also the center of everybody's attention, is a very different conference, and also one that is more polarized maybe than it was. I think that when it was sort of a fringe research crew, everybody was still in open lab mode. People were publishing their research, including the big labs. There was closer research between universities and industry, whereas now it seems like a lot of the frontier research requires like ginormous amounts of compute. It's happening in closed labs, OpenAI, Anthropic, even most of Google's like frontier research now is closed, etc. They're not sharing it. Those companies are treating NeurIPS as a recruiting event, and then academic research is totally sort of in a separate zone. And I sort of sense sometimes with the folks I talk to a little bit of resentment/envy from the academic community of all of the stuff happening in these frontier labs, who are throwing these lavish parties to lure the researchers in to their walled gardens where their knowledge could never escape again. And so I found that sort of strange. And I think that was like sort of the biggest theme that I picked up on.
How about you, Nathan? Is all the light of grad school being sucked into the black holes of frontier labs?
I don't know if there's first it assumes there is light. I just think that they feel like they don't have much ability to shift the discussion, so they don't feel very relevant, which is pretty fair. I've been reusing this line. I think each frontier lab has far more GPUs than all of academia combined. I haven't fact-checked myself, but if you assume that OpenAI et al. Have about 100,000 GPUs each per research, I wouldn't be surprised if that's comparable to the whole academic ecosystem, which just makes people be like, what's the point?
Right, that's weird, right?
Reasonable.
Like, research is supposed to be about pushing the frontier and doing the experimental stuff that isn't profitable. But actually, the experimental weird stuff, or at least the most ambitious stuff, probably is happening in closed frontier labs right now, right? And it's strange for the academic conference not to be the frontier anymore.
Yeah, that's potentially true. I would guess that there are phases in history where the academic conference is not the frontier. It's when there's like a rapid industrialization. So it's probably not the first time, but it might be the first time for this community, and generally a infrequent event.
So you guys over at AI2 have a very close collaboration with UW. Are there similar pipelines, Nathan, between some of these frontier labs and specific schools like Stanford OpenAI or Berkeley Anthropic?
In the US, not particularly. I think there's a cluster of schools like UW, Berkeley, Stanford, CMU that have the resources to do serious research, and there's a serious pipeline to all of the labs from there. I think that there's not that much academic crossover. I think that this is something that people say China does a lot better in terms of having close interplay between universities and industry. I think particularly like Tsinghua University is known to work with Z.AI, and there are probably others. So it's kind of hard to prove, but learning about that Chinese ecosystem part would be interesting.
Yeah, like I feel like it's less, at least with the Stanford Berkeley crew, because it's not collaboration. It's more of just a recruiting pipeline. What I hear is that, for example, in the Berkeley Bear PhD cohort, there are way more people graduating in 3 or 4 years so that they can go work at a frontier lab and make 10 times as much money.
And the opportunity cost is so high.
It makes sense to me. I get it.
Like if each year is $1 million plus opportunity
Totally.
cost, like why are you like, it's almost like if you want to go work at a frontier lab, why even finish?
Yeah.
I had a student ask me that the other day and I was like, if you want to go work at OpenAI and make a few $1 million, I support you.
Yeah.
Don't go work at some shitty startup that pays you in fake money. That's all I will stop them from doing. Gotta be money. It's gotta be real money in the bag for me to encourage them to go.
So, Jasmine, you also did a bunch of interviews for the Sale podcast booth at
I
NeurIPS.
did.
Tell us about the experience a little bit.
That was fun. Yeah, I do think that the cool thing about doing a bunch of sale interviews, like doing these like rapid fire, like 10-minute interviews with all sorts of researchers, startup people, whatever, was that it does provide a really broad perspective on the kinds of research that's happening with people from a lot of places, a lot of institutions. And it's kind of like getting your own mini poster session. I feel like I didn't need to like go around quite as much because every 10 minutes a new person would just show up in the room and tell me what they were working on and I would get
It's
to
the
ask my
business
questions.
class poster session.
Totally. What are the implications of this? Like, it's just a total one-on-one. If I have a question about this, I can ask it. But that was fun. I do think it was like cool to see the range. I mean, definitely a lot of multimodal stuff happening. So people doing audio models, people doing vision stuff. Yeah, I feel like people would, or even just saying like AI is multimodal. Like it's obviously true that like we don't think that text is everything anymore, which I don't think like a couple years ago was as seen as obviously true within the AI community. What else stood out? Some of it was just like there's some of the cross-disciplinary stuff was fun. So people sort of doing AI linguistics crossovers, people doing AI econ or public policy crossovers, neuroscience stuff. I remember we really enjoyed talking to that guy who studied sort of how different emotional patterns would light up in the brain during movies and sort of how this differed across different groups of people. And it turns out that everyone has a very similar fear response, but people tend to have the love portion of their brains light up at different moments because it's more socialized. So yeah, I thought that recording the podcast was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to seeing all of the clips and the 10-minute things come out. That'll be fun.
I think we
Nathan,
made a strong impression on people because multiple people came up to me after they did it and were like, thanks so much for doing it. And I didn't do that many. What did I do? Like 6 to 8. So I had, like that's a pretty high positive yield.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't get the chance to talk about their work in a like sort of public way and to have like a nice video made where you get to present. There's so many, yeah, I just like feel like having that asset is probably quite important for people. And that's where the
It's
part
a good
where
top of the funnel for people.
Mm.
It's like a lot of times you just need to have something that's like you've done something before, then more comes. It's like I'm
Yeah.
much more likely to have a podcast guest if I can find literally anything they've said and they sound coherent.
Yeah. Like I hope people put these on their like personal websites or their LinkedIn's or whatever, you know? Like, it just like feels like slightly more legit. When I was an undergrad, like I remember I did like one little 10-minute presentation at some like low stakes expo, but like they had a really good videographer and I just like felt much more legit after I could like put in my portfolio and everything. And that's the part where also like even though I feel like my NeurIPS piece was a little bit jaded and maybe it was because the people I was hanging out with were a little jaded, I do think that there are a lot of grad students from, you know, especially people who are not spending all day in San Francisco or the Bay Area or whatever, for whom this is like a huge opportunity to network with other researchers, to find out what's happening around the world in the Bay Area. And so like there's a lot of like earnest academic energy that I don't want to suppress and dunk on just because I don't want to go to any more like agents meetups or whatever.
Nathan, you had a member of the Interconnects team come for the first time to the States. Tell us about hanging out with Florian a little bit. He was on our morning call today.
We fed him fried chicken advertisements. I mean, that's an example of the positive academic energy is the joy of meeting a bunch of people who you have been familiar with online and being able to ask questions about stuff that occupies a lot of your brain space to multiple people where normally you just have no outlet. I mean, whenever I give a talk, there's like 5 to 15 people after that want to ask like very random technical questions. And I think that's kind of a better representation of what the stated purpose of affairs is.
What was the first NeurIPS you went to?
2019,
Okay.
I had a workshop paper, and I was still trying to break into AI and literally knew 0 other people that were going to the conference. And it was in Vancouver and insane. I was like, what the fuck is going on here? I have no idea what to do.
What do you feel like is the difference, both the conference and how you feel about it between 2019 and
I think you just need to have a critical mass of people that you know, because then you have like at least something to ground you and normal interaction. Because if you don't know anyone, you literally have no social interaction while being in a mob, which I think is very
yeah.
off-putting for people.
And then you're also going to be in the mode where you're just like looking at people's name tags, being like, so what do you do? And it's like horrible. I actually like the one workshopy thing I did was I went to this post AGI governance side event, which was in some ways like really weird and wonky and like full of sort of like Oxford extremist types. Like there are definitely some Oxford extremist types present, which was made the biggest impression on me. There are also lots of like thoughtful non-extremist types who are interested in AI governance. And there was a part of me that kind of wished that I just spent like the whole day there, because it is nice to have a contained group of like 50 people with a shared interest who you just like hang out with for all day, as opposed to like being in like the masses of the conference center. And so I did think that even though there were some like real crazy conversations going on, it was overall a pretty positive thing to like have signed up for this like smaller workshop and spending some time there.
So looking forward, do you think you will both make the trip to Australia for NeurIPS 2026?
That's a very different commitment than San Diego. Like Australia's beautiful and it's going to be summer. There's a world where I kind of want to go because I'm like, oh, it's going to be so beautiful and summery, but it is such a trek to get to Sydney from here. Yeah, I mean, again, my takeaway was like, I literally came back from NeurIPS to SF. And then like I went to a birthday party at my friend who works at a labs house and talked to a bunch of AI researchers at the party. And then I like went to another thing and it was just like everybody's still having the same conversations that we were having at NeurIPS. Did I really need to take like a 2-hour flight to do this over there? I could do it here already. And so I don't know that I'm going to do it for Sydney, but maybe.
I haven't gone across an ocean for work in multiple years, and it's nice. I would say that I feel like I've tapped too far onto the creator side, which is making it so that what has been my differentiation, which is being actually a researcher, is waning because I just have too much shit going on. Like, can't approach these things as if it is my... Like doing 2 jobs never actually works. You normally have one master.
Yeah.
Nathan, you recorded your talks as one kind of super talk and released it this week. Tell us kind of what you cover and what the thinking was behind these 2 talks.
One of them is a talk that I've been giving at a few venues, which is effectively from pre-trading to post-trading to whatever, what you have to reconsider when you're building a reasoning or thinking model relative to what the industry was doing in like in the last few years with what is called instruct models. And that's kind of fun because it's some of everything and not just like one esoteric research topic, which I think is nice, but it's realistically a lot of RL infrastructure, which is probably the biggest technical change. So I think that's a good talk. A lot of academic talks, while they talk about multiple papers, don't have a lot of variety and things. And the other one is very outside my comfort zone, which is a talk on evaluations. I mostly use it as time to reflect on how evaluations inform our process of building a model and what our limiting factors are and kind of what the weaknesses of our setup is, which is kind of unavoidable weaknesses. So it's like the structural weaknesses of a smallish team building language models and you only have a few evals that you hill climb on, and how it kind of makes you uneasy because you pretty much can hill climb on them infinitely, but you know at some point you're just going to overfit to them and you never really know when. So just kind of sharing a lot of that. And I also think is nice because nobody talks about this, but I'm also putting things on slides where if somebody asks a question about this, I'm just going to be like, work here, which I don't love to do, but I got out of it unscathed.
Being in the Midas 50 for AI and also having imposter syndrome is very on brand for you, Nathan.
What is the Midas 50? Is that the stupid
That's the
TVPN thing?
We don't
Correct.
respect the TVPN list.
I wasn't in the top 50. I was in the top 200.
Right. So when it came out, I was like, oh, it's funny. I think a lot of the times TVPN just makes funny stuff and I like it and I respect trying to just do bits and make memes, like their new media map. I thought it was funny. But then people started taking it seriously. People started taking the new media map seriously. They started taking the Midas list seriously. And then like, I'm like, dude, it has number of Dorkesh appearances as one of the criteria. I don't know, like some dead person didn't have any Dorkesh appearances, you know? Like, obviously,
I
this
just
is not
don't
meant
like
to be
it
taken
because
seriously.
someone I think I'm better than is higher than is on it, and I'm not. I just took
Well,
it personally.
I mostly just feel like the rest of the media is too out of it to understand what's a joke and not a joke. And so they're just misleading everybody.
Is TBPN very successful or just successful?
Successful at what? At making money? Very successful. At building a
Okay.
recognizable brand? Very successful. Having influence? Unclear to me yet. But great brand, very lucrative.
I regard TBPN and Substack as being these like two opposing forces in media right now. Substack makes culture and not money. TBPN makes money and not culture. And one day they'll unite and create the ultimate new media ecosystem.
TBPN
and that
is
will
in
be the
fact
day.
on Substack.
Why does TBPN not make culture?
Like I think like the existence of TBPN is a form of culture. Like we're gonna lean
Almost
into
like Dork.
this thing. I wonder because okay, like one thing that I think Dorkesh does is he can sort of set the direction of conversations in AI at this point. And I don't know if TBPN is at that level yet. I wouldn't be surprised if they get there, but it's not obviously true for now. Reporting on stuff that they are like really establishing like theses and frameworks and like this matters, this doesn't, etc. But you know, who's one of them, John, is writing essays now, so that's cool. I think it's cool that they're writing essays.
On that note, our time is coming to an end. Thank you both for your time. We'll do
Okay.
this again in the new year. Appreciate you both very much.